Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping right behind closed doors into one of the absolute highest stakes policy debates gripping Washington right now. We're going to break down the future of U.S.-China relations and decipher a really monumental shift in global strategy.
To set the stage, there is a quote that really hits the nail on the head regarding the core problem here. As Deputy Secretary of State Kurt Campbell and National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan pointed out, the decades-long era of engagement with China has unceremoniously closed. So, the burning question that foreign policy experts are fiercely debating right now is simply, what comes next?
Here's our roadmap for today. 1. The post-engagement debate. 2. The competition for order. 3. Why old strategies fail. 4. The asymmetric strategy. And finally, 5. Blunting and building.
All right, let's dive into part 1, the post-engagement debate, inside the Washington think tanks.
Who is actually driving this massive geopolitical policy debate? Well, it's certainly not happening in a vacuum. It's largely being waged by elites in Washington, think tanks, universities, and NGOs. They are constantly theorizing and sparring through op-eds and policy journals, all trying to define the next era of global politics.
To make sense of all that noise, experts have actually categorized these thinkers into distinct camps. For instance, Kurt Campbell identifies 5 different policy factions, ranging all the way from the traditional engagement folks to those who literally view China as an outright enemy. Meanwhile, researcher David McCourt frames the debate as 4 schools of thought, like the strategic competitors or the new Cold Warriors. Honestly, it just goes to show how totally fractured the foreign policy establishment is right now.
Moving on to part 2. The competition for order, and what is actually at stake here.
So what are they fighting over? The ultimate prize is global order. And order isn't just about who has the biggest military, right? It's a hierarchy sustained by 3 distinct forms of control. Coercive capability, which is your military or economic force. Consensual inducements, meaning incentivizing compliance through mutually beneficial trade. And finally, legitimacy, having the recognized, accepted authority to actually lead.
Which brings us to part 3, why old strategies fail and the flaws of the past.
For decades, the U.S. basically bounced between 2 main approaches, and experts argue both are fundamentally unworkable today. First, you have accommodating China, offering spheres of influence or grand bargains. But that often leads to broken promises, like the premature end of Hong Kong's autonomy. On the flip side, the strategy of changing China by promoting peaceful, democratic evolution, that completely fails too. Why? Because the Chinese Communist Party views Western subversion as an absolute existential threat and has built a massive surveillance state to stop it in its tracks. So neither of those old approaches works anymore.
Okay, part 4, the asymmetric strategy, effectively our new playbook.
With the old strategies out the window and the stakes being so incredibly high, how does the U.S. compete in peacetime without completely bankrupting itself? Well, think about this number for a second. 60%. That is absolutely crucial. China is the first U.S. competitor in over a century to surpass 60% of U.S. GDP. In fact, if you look at purchasing power, the Chinese economy is already 25% larger than America's. We are in completely uncharted territory here.
Because of that massive economic engine, the U.S. simply can't compete symmetrically anymore. It's a real David versus Goliath reality. Washington cannot match Beijing ship for ship or loan for loan. Instead, experts suggest the U.S. has to adopt an asymmetric strategy. This means taking deliberate actions that impose a much greater cost on the opponent than the cost of the action itself.
The 2 main engines of this whole asymmetric playbook are blunting and building. Blunting is all about cheaply tearing down Chinese leverage and their hegemonic ambitions. Building, on the other hand, means reinforcing the core foundations of U.S. strength, usually by diffusing the really high costs across a network of global allies.
Let's get into the specifics in part 5, blunting and building, the tactics in action.
Let's break this down across military, economic, and political lines. First up, militarily. Instead of trying to match those incredibly expensive aircraft carriers, blunting means investing in cheaper anti-access weapons. We're talking about sea mines, unmanned submarines, and drones to essentially create a no-man's sea. It's also about undermining costly Chinese overseas bases at a tiny fraction of the price it actually took to build them.
Then, to build its own military order, the U.S. has to play a bit of defense.
It needs to harden its existing bases against potential missile strikes, widely distribute its forces across the Indo-Pacific so they aren't easy targets, and secure highly resilient information and communication infrastructure. You have to maintain command and control no matter what.
Switching gears to the economy, economic blunting is really about using transparency as a weapon. By forcing multilateral oversight onto China's massive Belt and Road Initiative and using the media to expose corrupt, opaque foreign infrastructure deals, the U.S. can blunt Chinese economic leverage without needing to match their trillion-dollar spending sprees.
On the flip side, economic building means fiercely protecting the absolute bedrock of U.S. power, the dollar. Washington has to maintain U.S. dollar dominance against China's emerging digital currency. It also means creating dedicated groups to audit vulnerable American supply chains and pouring investments back into basic science research and top-tier STEM talent. Next is the political arena. Political blunting is kind of fascinating. It actually means joining Chinese-led institutions specifically to stall or shape their progress from the inside. It means aggressively blocking Chinese candidates in UN elections and putting legal restrictions on autocracy-owned platforms like TikTok, which are viewed as major vulnerabilities in the global information space.
And for political building, that means organizing entirely new allied coalitions. The sources point to things like forming a D10, a cartel of 10 leading democratic nations, to set global standards for next-generation tech like 5G and global trade, entirely bypassing the institutions where China holds a veto. It's all about sharing the heavy lifting with friends.
So we've got this massive, comprehensive playbook of blunting and building laid out. But the million-dollar question remains, will this asymmetric strategy actually succeed where every past effort has essentially failed?
To get some perspective on that, let's look back at an amazing piece of history from 1973. China's own premier at the time, Zhou Enlai, was warning a young American delegation that China might one day become an aggressive power itself. He emphatically told them, if China were to embark on such a path, you must oppose it, and you must tell those Chinese that Zhou Enlai told you to do so. The crucial takeaway here is that the asymmetric strategy fundamentally accepts reality. The U.S. cannot magically transform China's internal politics. That's a lost cause. But it can cleverly and asymmetrically constrain China's ability to convert its massive domestic power into an external global footprint.
As we officially close the book on 50 years of engagement, we're left with one final, pretty heavy question to chew on. Are we truly ready for the grueling, decades-long competition required to build the next global order? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer to decipher these really profound strategic shifts. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you next time.